Today, the session that we are looking at looks at gender and development from multiple perspectives, multiplicity being educational, anthropological, and socio-political perspectives. The panelists here, we have a very strong panel. I will start from my immediate right, Dr. Minahil Asim. She is very much she will talk about educational perspectives. We have Dr. Steen Lyons. Minahil, tell me about your university, Faculty of Education.
Yes, I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of Ottawa.
Okay, welcome. We have Dr. Steve Lyons, Lyon. The S creeps in. Dean, Faculty of Arts and Sciences from the Aga Khan University. And we have Dr. Tahira Khan. She is visiting faculty at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at the Aga Khan University and also from the University of Columbia in the USA. What I will do, after a few brief introductory remarks, I will then invite the panel to first introduce their studies very briefly. And after that, I will pose them a question arising from their papers. I don't know whether everybody received their papers or had the privilege of reading their papers. That's why it's important for us to invite the panelists to at least introduce their studies briefly so that it provides the context. And then we will open up for the audience open question and answers. And I will conclude by inviting the panelists again to make a brief remark. Is that okay? This is a very different structure from the panel discussions that we have seen today and yesterday, so please bear with us. Education, we have heard throughout the day, in fact yesterday, that there are many developmental challenges that Pakistan faces. And gender from multiplicity of perspectives is seen as part of the problem and is also posed that if we address the gender issue one way or the other, it will be, we would be able to address many of the developmental challenges. Education, within this conversation, education is very much seen as a strategy that would enable equitable, just formulations of the society by giving, redistributing the opportunities and redistributing access to education and to provide girls and women also opportunities for growth, for development, and availing their own potential. But we continue to see structural and certain very systemic inequalities in the education system. And part of that is because we continue to look at education from a service delivery perspective. We don't look at those social, political, fundamental socio-cultural causes that lead to these systemic inequalities. So I will, with these opening remarks, I feel that the panel we have today will bring forward the multiple dimensions through which we look at the gender and development perspective. And with those brief remarks, I will then start by inviting my colleague Steve Lyon. Steve, if you would just introduce your study briefly, and then I will come back to you with a key question emerging from your study.
Sure. So this really is a paper I published twice, once in a journal and then in an edited volume, which I edited 2 or 3 years after that, because as we all know, that the sort of specialist anthropology and education journals don't have wide readership. So I wanted to get this paper read a little bit. I worked and lived in a village in Attock district, northern Punjab, in the late 90s, 98 to 99, into 2000. I continue to go back to the same village. When I first went there, there was a girls' school. It was a building they called the girls' school, but it had no teacher and it had no students. And the reason people gave is it had no boundary wall and it had no restrooms, had no washrooms for the girls. So no one was willing to send their children there. Now, the boundary wall and the restrooms was actually something that was relatively easy to address, but then there were other barriers, that fundamentally there was an attitude across the village among the men, most of the men that I spoke to. In fact, I didn't meet a single man who encouraged girls to be educated. They thought that educating girls was bad for the household. It was damaging for the household, it was damaging for the village. So I wrote this paper some years later. I did a tour of most of the schools in this area, a collection of about 10 villages. I went to the middle school, I went to the primary schools, and I went as far as Atak Government College to try and get the tertiary level. And at every stage I found the same resistance to girls' education because it's disruptive. It isn't good for the household. So I thought about this a great deal, and I thought about my time in Lahore many years before when my mother had been working with lady health workers and the access that lady health workers had to households. They were going in ostensibly to teach about nutrition, first aid, basic health care, but of course these women didn't just do that. They also did other things. So I thought, how do we piggyback education onto something that is not threatening, that is not offensive? And so I said, okay, we'll have a school. We should actually have gender-defined schools. Have schools for boys that will teach tractor maintenance, agricultural, economics, and that sort of thing. And school for girls, which will teach primary first aid, nutrition, some household economics about managing shopping, but something like that. And in both cases, literacy will be a part of it. You sneak literacy and numeracy in. And the argument in 2004, when I first wrote this paper, 2007, when I published a revision of it, was that you give them a generation of literacy and numeracy, the next generation of girls may be able to have the kind of education that would be deemed more threatening. And so you sort of sneak it in. Now, when I presented this paper, when I published it, I got a lot of criticism from like my colleagues on this panel. They were very angry at me, Pakistani feminists, saying, you're just apologizing for patriarchal misogynists. And I will leave that there for now, because I think that's all we need for the introduction. I'm sure that Anjum will pick me up on that.
Yes, sure. I think that is a very provocative point on which to leave your remarks. But tell us a little bit about this incremental design to education and development that you have proposed in your paper, which led to this kind of a reaction. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I was sort of hanging a lot on the potential of literacy and numeracy to bring in a revolution through the back door that men would not find threatening, because a lot of the overt education that women were getting, so in 2007, 2008, 2009, girls started to be educated more, and the education was overtly religious. And it was very much about women's rights within Islam. The men didn't like that. The men were very unhappy about this. They didn't want their ladies being taught about their rights. Now, of course, the women had literacy, so they were learning about their rights, at least within Islam, if not within the wider state. And of course, 2009, 2010, 2011, when I was going to this village, what I saw was not divorce, because divorce is very difficult in the villages, but it seemed to me an increase in men talking very openly about how unhappy they were with their household, how unhappy they were with their marriages, that they did not want their wives to have so much knowledge about their rights and so much involvement in their land disputes. Because the women, one of the things they learned is that they're entitled to a half share of land of their brother. And that was a real problem. It was a threat. Now we are a generation beyond that, and I think they've all reconciled that. That's okay. But it was that I see now that almost every single girl in the school is educated, many of them to university level, some to master's level, and I think it started with a very non-threatening literacy, just basic literacy around things like, let's get your the women in your household to be better able to manage the menu so that the men in the household have proper nutrition and basic primary first aid, so that when you have a cut, when you have a scrape, and of course we all know that in South Asia, when you have a cut, you really have to treat it, because there are so many bacteria, so many toxins around that, in England you can ignore most cuts. In this country, I find when I cut myself, I have to do antiseptic and I have to cover it, because within hours it will be inflamed, it will be very dangerous. And so women having this expert knowledge, men accepted that was very good. You sneak literacy in, and here we are 20 years later, we have women who are engaged in land disputes, they own land outright. I think we have seen a revolution in the gender relations. It came about incrementally, and at no point, although men were unhappy in the middle of this, they were not divorcing their wives, they weren't beating their wives, they weren't killing their wives. And that was my big fear in 1998, 99, is that actually there were stories about honor killings and killing of women, and I was afraid that if we, the people who believed in gender equality, pushed too hard, we would wind up getting women killed in these villages.
Okay. So I guess you were looking at literacy and numeracy pretty much as packaged and insulated
Yes.
from the wider social issues. That is, of course, another very big line of debate and discussion. But thank you very much. We'll leave it at that for now and maybe come back to those issues in the open discussion session. Dr. Tahira, you have been in the field for more than 2 decades now, right? And I'd be very appreciative if you would also introduce your studies in the field of gender and education. Briefly introduce your studies, and then I'll come back with any key question emerging, as we did in the case of Steve.
Thanks, Anjum. First of all, please accept my apologies for being late. And so I'm going to differ drastically with Steve, what kind of picture he's showing us for girls' education. I am taking a different approach here in this panel. Since yesterday, I've been listening to different sessions, and I was like, oh, okay, someone has to deviate. Someone has to step out of the traditional format of a workshop or a design. So I'm going to be one of them. So it's like my qualitative research over the period of 2 decades. And it's on the topic of gender and development, and it will be more like I will share like more kind of a mini paper by comparing all my 3 studies later on. So this is kind of an introductory paragraph. So my research questions and arguments today come from a combination of my long time teaching, 35 years teaching experience of gender and development. Basically by discipline, I'm political science teacher, history and political science, but within political science and history, my interest in women when there was a time of WID time in women and development, and then GAD came later on. So my PhD dissertation in 1992, when I started writing my dissertation, that was on women political leaders in South Asia. So women in political development, women and politics. So gender wasn't that fashionable at that time. I was in the US, and it was like hardly heard. I mean, it was appearing in the academic writings, but practically it wasn't applied in the field. So that teaching experience of courses on development studies. So like I started teaching courses like gender and education, gender and politics, gender and religion, gender and Islam, everything, gender and human rights, everything gender. So over the next 15 years, most of the courses, like the universities wanted me to teach something on gender. So that was helpful for me. Actually, I had to struggle to incorporate gender in my political science theories, but I don't know how much did I succeed. And besides the teaching experience, which I will share with you, my findings from my teaching of the courses on gender, I had done 2 studies in the field. So from 1998 onwards, I was out of the university. Here in Pakistan, I was back and I was in the field. I was working with the civil society organizations, with NGOs, and that was the peak time of gender and development paradigm, and as well as women's NGOs. Working with women's NGO was very fashionable. So I was out of my academic world in the field, and but I was still craving to go back to an educational institution. So I got this golden opportunity of joining the Institute for Educational Development at Aga Khan University in year 2000. So they asked me to develop a course on gender and education, MA and PhD level modules. So there I found this great opportunity to be in the field and working in Balochistan for 1.5 years from the platform of the ID, and the project was to conduct research and then to train the activists for action research in their communities, because one of the major NGOs, NGO in Quetta, they had received funding from the World Bank in 1992 for girls' education program, and only till the primary level, up to 5 years. And after 8 years, in 2000, by that time, they realized some evaluations were done that it wasn't working. So by the year, 4th grade, it was like more than 50% girls were out of the school. And then by the 5th year, I mean, like only less than 10% were graduating from the primary school. What was going on? So I will share with you some of the findings and the tactics and the strategies which they did and failed. So they approached the IED, Aga Khan University, to get research conducted to find out the factors, socio-economic, political factors. Why wasn't it working? So I was the principal investigator, so I had 2 more researchers with me in the team, and so for 1.5 years, we were traveling every 3 months, and we had 11 districts of Balochistan. So the format of the research was that every 3 months, we would be based in Quetta for more than a week, and we would meet the development activists, community workers, school teachers, and human rights organizations representatives who were working, who were involved in those projects. So they were bringing their data from their districts to Quetta. So for 1 week, we were brainstorming, and we were we were collecting the data that we were just making an unplanned list of factors for the failure of that project. So that is one study. So I prepared the report, and I will share a very interesting but disturbing findings also out of that study later on. And I prepared the report after 1.5 years, and then it is lying in the ID archives. I haven't had chance to get permission to get it published. So, but it is still accessible. Okay, this is one. The other one, after 10 years, 2009 to 2010, here I live in Karachi, and I was approached by a big NGO, donor-funded NGO, to conduct research, to be a facilitator to conduct workshops regarding, again, the female education and the girls' education, primary and middle school level. And this is now, my geographical context was different now. So from Balochistan to Sindh, and interestingly, on the bordering areas of both of the provinces. So I will share those findings also. I have been given the alert. So besides my teaching learnings from the classroom, so I will combine all three of these research areas, and I'm going to share it with you later on. Okay, thank
Sorry.
you.
Sorry, it's horrible to send the time notice,
No,
but
it's
you know.
okay.
Yes, so Tahira, thank you very much. You provided some very good background to, that will help us contextualize some of the
Yes.
issues that you are alluding to and which you will speak about. So tell me a little bit about how the societal structures, you know, the intervention was very much for primary school participation. But what were those societal structures that were either impeding or facilitating this intervention? When we situate that intervention into the broader social, cultural context.
I could see, especially in the quota study, I could see the only facilitating actors, those community workers. They were the human rights activists and development workers who were actually, again, I mean, that is another problem I have with this donor-funded projects, because they were all paid. They were not voluntary workers. So they were paid for the work to promote female education. So they were very dedicated, highly dedicated, most of them male workers, male practitioners. And, but besides that, the kind of data I was receiving, the kind of stories I was hearing, they were very discouraging. Very discouraging. Like, I mean, a few things I share with you here. For example, when the project organizers started realizing, like in 1997, 98, because the project started in 1992, that it was failing. So the results were not being achieved. So they started applying different strategies, different tactics, by providing some incentives for the parents to send their girls to school. One of the incentive was, I was shocked to know the incentive was that parents were told if their daughter goes to school for like 80% attendance, with 80% attendance in 1 month, they would be given 5 kg cooking oil can. Okay? So the feedback which I got, I mean, my finding was that the fake registers were made. So the girls were still staying home, fake registers were made, and the cooking oil was being sold in the market.
Oh.
So for me, everything was shocking. Coming from the classroom, always teaching theories, philosophies, and this is what was happening. Okay, that was one thing. The other thing was like language. Imagine, Urdu and English, parents were scared of that language, because those languages, because they thought that if the girls learn English or Urdu, I mean, these were the wordings, but what would they, I have written in my report that the parents said that, what if we can't read English or Urdu, what if she writes a love letter to someone, communicates with someone? How would we find out? So these are the kind of unbelievable findings which I started getting. So very discouraging, not facilitating at least.
Thank you, Tahira. We will come back to you
Yeah.
with more questions. You have a burning question for Tahira? No. Okay. So Minahil, we'll come to you, and as with the other panelists, Minahil, if you will first introduce your study, so that participants can contextualize the discussion.
Sure. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for putting me up as a part of this panel. I'm a quantitative social scientist, so I'll talk about numbers without slides. So please bear with me. This is a very, very preliminary study. It started off as an idea about looking at transitions from secondary to post-secondary education. So we were interested in, you hear a lot that, girls, boys, both, they drop out after grade 10 or after the intermediate in Pakistan or other developing countries, but they don't transition to, say, four-year universities and colleges. So we tried to dig up numbers, and we found that of the eligible age population, only 12% of students in Pakistan actually end up in a four-year university. And then we started looking at and when I say we, it's my collaborators and also my RA and now co-author Anisha, who is here. Thank you for coming. We started looking at different papers from other low-income country contexts about what is out there. And the first thing that we saw is that there's very, very little out there because, again, as we speak about donor agencies and these reform efforts, they've only focused on primary and secondary education. The Millennium Development Goals were about universal primary education. The Sustainable Development Goals were more focused on secondary or finishing school. So we kind of missed out higher education in that process. So that's where the idea for this came from. And then we worked with an NGO in Karachi, which I'm going to name, the Citizens Foundation, because Ali is here and Ali allowed me to use it. So Ali is our partner there. And we wanted to understand that all the students who graduate from TCF, grade 10 matriculation, what do their trajectories look like? And the TCF college, they have this really interesting school, a two-year intermediate college in Karachi, where students come in and they go through a rigorous program. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about how this college differs from other two-year FA, FSC programs, where students come in and then they transition to four-year, or we try to study if they transition to four-year universities or not. So we were quite excited, and this is, again, like a quantitative study that evaluates the effectiveness of this two-year program. But that's not the only thing that our paper is trying to do, and it's a very rudimentary, preliminary paper. But the first thing the paper is trying to do is try to measure the effects of this program. The second thing that it's trying to do is that there is some evidence from low and middle income countries that talks about various factors that predict transitions to post-secondary education. Biggest factor being gender. So for example, in Vietnam, there is research that suggests that women are more likely to go to college. In India, it's the opposite. The boys are more likely to go to college. Then it also varies. So if it's a medical school, girls are more likely to go there as opposed to engineering. So all of these things are, something that we're interested in, that how are students from this particular college transitioning. The second thing, again, is wealth and parental education, big predictors of going into a four-year university. So this is something, again, that we try to unpack in this study. So before I go into the results, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what this program is. So this program prepares students for the higher secondary school certificate, which is, 10वीं में आप metric देते हैं, and then 2 years of inter that students do. They're not allowed to get outside coaching or tuition because there's a huge market for tuitions, right? You're in a college, but you end up taking outside help, and that helps you improve your scores. But that's something that this college strictly doesn't do. But the important thing here is that the higher secondary school certificate, the 12th exam, is in English, whereas it's a lot of schools, you're till metric, you're actually studying in a different language, and then all of a sudden you're expected to take this exam, especially in the Sindh board, in English. The second thing that this program does is that it offers counseling, which is, again, unheard of in many of these two-year colleges, which is how can you apply to four-year universities and what financial aid opportunities are available for you either through the government or through TCF themselves. And counseling also how to prepare for university exams in English and interviews, which is a big gap in other two-year colleges. And the third important thing that it does is that there's a big focus on developing certain socio-emotional skills, say, growth mindset and, trying to inculcate confidence in your own ability to work hard and also, great. All these sound like buzzwords, but all of these things are kind of incorporated in the curriculum in this two-year college. So should I just go into the results, or should we wait? Okay. So I'll give you a brief overview of what the results are, and then I'm happy to answer any detailed questions. So we compare students from TCF who graduate in grade 10, give their metric exams, who enter a two-year college wherever, mostly in Karachi, and then we compare them to students who go to TCF college, and we do a whole. Anisha can talk more about that, but we do propensity score weighting. We try to match them in ways that are econometrically sound. And what we find is that students in these colleges, they're more likely to finish compared to the others. They're approximately 20% more likely to apply to a four-year university, and they're actually 30% more likely to enroll in the four-year university. And this is an ongoing partnership, and we also want to see how likely they are to then finish the four-year university. So that's something that a future project is going to look at. So these are like huge effects. One, that haven't been studied in a low-income setting like ours, and also just really, really promising that a two-year college like this can do that. And we also try to unpack how this is why this is happening, what is the college doing differently, apart from all the things that I spoke about. And the biggest thing is actually the counseling element. It is that students report that they have way more information about the process of application, about the fact that they are able to know what financial aid opportunities are available either by the private college that they apply to or by the government for a government college that they're applying to, and that really helps them then improve. And then the last bit that I said, that the big factors that we talk about when we talk about transitions, gender, wealth, parental education, we have two big findings, and again, preliminary, taken with a pinch of salt. One is that we see that both boys and girls are more likely to go to four-year universities. But the program benefits boys more than girls. So boys are able to utilize some of the aspects of this college compared to girls. And that, again, it's another project, a more in-depth investigation of what girls are doing or what the college could do differently so that it benefits girls as well. And the second thing, we expected that, like wealth or parental education, which are predictors or can be used as proxies for social capital, you would expect that students who are coming in with more social capital would leverage that and then do better. We actually have no evidence of that. So if you come in, if you don't have that social capital, you're as likely to go to college as somebody or university as somebody who doesn't. So it is, in a way, I don't want to amp it up too much because it's an expensive, like you can't have these colleges everywhere in the country. So there are big policy implications for what a place like this looks like. But at the surface level, at what we're trying to do, it is equalizing. It is helping students who maybe at the lower tier of the level of wealth. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Minahil. Before I open it up to the audience, I just had one key question. I would be interested in knowing how language of instruction played out. Because if I understand correctly, the language of instruction in TCF schools is the local and then the national language. And yet when the students go to the higher education, the language is English. So did language play a role in the transition?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we thought that this would be the biggest thing that would influence TCF College is teaching primarily in English, and it is preparing for the English exams. We can't test it with the data we have, because the only data we have, but the study happened during COVID, so a lot of the FSC English tests that didn't happen, which is what we were using as proxies for the effect on the English language. So, having spoken to our stakeholders, they, like Ali and others at DCF, they do say that the fact that this 2-year college is focusing on English, that must have played a big role in why the students are then eventually able to go to universities.
Okay. Thank you. So now what we will do is we'll go for a round of questions. We will take about 3 questions, collect them, and then pose them to the panelists, and then maybe go for another round or 2 after that. So the floor is yours. Yes?
I guess I have a question for Minahil. Are there any longer-term labor market impacts of going to the colleges? Because I think the economics literature is pretty open about that. It's actually unclear what the effects are on labor market outcomes of people even after they go to college. And then secondly, I think the literature now has a consensus where the issue is not people going to these universities, but actually learning stuff there. And then the biggest issue there is not teaching people the correct curriculum, right? Maybe teaching them stuff that's too hard for them. So yeah, whatever your thoughts are on that. I don't think that people in Pakistan study the curriculum aspect of it that much.
Okay. Yes?
So I'm trying to link the title of this panel to some of the discussion or the presentations that have taken place. And for me, what is interesting, or what I would like to hear more about, is that we're talking about research that has been done maybe 20 or so years ago. How does that tie into the kind of change that we are seeing today in terms of whether we're talking about political perspectives, education? Is there change? And can we kind of really try and get to the root causes of how that change took place or why it took place? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a question perhaps all of the panelists could respond to, because although Dr. Tahira's research happened 20 years ago, but in the panel, there is much more contemporary research as well. So yes. A third question? Yes, please.
Thank you so much. So if I may, G, the early 90s was also a time actually when generally all aid support and how it was implemented was being questioned. So whether you look at the social action program and sort of the administration of international aid had its own weaknesses. And then you have, of course, societal issues that were, exactly as you said, that were at a different point in time. So it'd be very interesting to hear the experiences of how you see both these things having evolved. So donors still play a really big and important role in Pakistan when it comes to education reform, education service delivery, but also, so that's how that's shifted versus how you see norms having shifted. I'll stop here.
Yes, the donor intervention and narrative shifting along with the societal norms shifting, yes. Okay, so who'd like to get us started? Minahil, there was a specific question to you, so perhaps you could start with that, and then we can take it around.
Sure. Great questions. My first response, so there were 2 questions, so I'll respond to the first one first. The college started in 2017, and we have data starting 2018, which means that the cohort that we've looked at are still in university. So we would like to go back to them and find out whether or how they fared at the in the labor market, and whether 4-year universities guarantee them that. The second thing is there's like most other things, there's no centralized database of universities. Like you can get public university data from the AGC, but there are as many private universities in Pakistan as there are. So you're right, there's very little research done on it because of the unavailability of data. The second thing, again, I completely take your point about what you're actually learning in the university or college matters more than just finishing. Although there is research that says even finishing, if you're an economist, then the difference between, say, signaling, credentialing versus, say, actual human capital development. So I think there's a tension in that debate. It's a long-lasting 50-year tension, but I do think that even the credential in and of itself has value in the labor market, and not to say that they're not learning anything. I'd like to add one last thing, which we're still trying to explore. So TCF ranks the universities that their graduates go to, into, like, for example, IBA would be a tier 1 university. I'm sitting at LUMS and saying that LUMS would be a tier 1 university, and say, some other universities would be tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And what we're finding is that a lot of the graduates from the TCF college are actually ending up at tier 3 and 4 universities. So that's where most enrollment is, not necessarily at the higher end. So it's a great question to explore, that if they're going there, how are they faring? So thank you for asking that question.
Steve?
If I could actually respond to that one as well.
Yes, sure,
In
sure.
that same edited volume where I published a paper about incremental education, there was a paper by Afke de Groot on a fishing community on the Sindh coast, that these fisher people had taken the decision to take their children away from fishing socialization, put them into school. So these boys and girls, mostly boys, went to the school, did matriculation, and the parents were bitterly disappointed that the kids were unfit to be fishermen, because fishing is not a job you just learn. You spend years of apprenticeship, so the kids were out of that at that critical point of time. And the parents realized after matric, the only job that the kids were actually fit for, or not fit for, they were fit for many jobs, but the only one they could get was, at the best, was civil service, to effectively be the batsman or the shoeshine boy of a higher ranking civil servant. So the parents felt they'd really been kind of ripped off, that yes, they'd done what they were supposed to do for a better life, and they effectively killed their community. The fishing village didn't have the next generation of fishermen. So I always tell my students this, that education, of course, is a good. My entire life has been about education, but it's not neutral. It does change things, and some people actually may suffer as a consequence. So I think this is absolutely a good question to ask. What is the long-term economic consequence of this? Is it actually making life potentially even worse for people?
Not just the economic consequences, but in this case, even the social consequences, because the structure of the community itself would disintegrate with the young people now moving out of that profession.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, so, and on the issue of changing the norms, the gender norms in the society, alongside, since over the 20-year span that we are talking about, if you have any.
It's a brilliant question, and it's a really difficult one to ask. Not difficult one to ask, difficult one to answer with a lot of confidence, because the gender relations in the villages that I've worked in have transformed. They're almost unrecognizable. Girls are getting educated, women are having much more say in their marriage choices. Some small number of women are actually working outside the home. That's a very small number. If you'd asked me this 3 weeks ago, I would have said, yeah, it's really changed. I just went to a wedding in this same area, village walima, in a wedding hall, 3,000 men, not a single woman there. I said, where are the ladies? In Karachi, they're all mixed. And they said, oh no, ladies do village walima in the village. And so actually, there are some areas where plus ça change and so on. It actually, I think there's a persistence to assumptions about gender that really are very hard to shake. But the women are being educated. They are actually owning land in their own right. So I think there's a concrete change. There's a material change, and I've seen it in 20 years. Education is only a part of it. It's not just education, but that, I think, was pivotal for the women to have that kind of articulation, that ability to articulate their own positions in a way that the men, who actually are often undereducated, so the wives are getting better educated than the men sometimes, and the men are kind of stumped because that education has helped. And it hasn't led to, as far as I can tell, greater violence against the women, which was my anxiety in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Tahira?
Yes. I knew it was coming. Your brilliant question. Yes, 20 years span. So the third study I did here, which is actually an ongoing study for the past 2 years. So basically looking at the question of changing perceptions of gender, Uh, Positively or negatively? Change is, definitely change happens. Every moment is changing. But change, again, what kind of change? That is my question now when I'm doing another research that is actually part of my forthcoming book, and I'm working with my mentor, Professor Laila Abulugad at Columbia. And I'm looking at it's a parallel study of religious groups preaching Muslim women's activism, actually, that in the context of Pakistan. Looking at the religious activism among the preaching groups, and then looking at the secular liberal activism, mainly NGO-led activism or NGO-based activism. So it's like tentatively the title is Beyond Secularity and Religiosity. So the methodology, which I had to create it because there was no method or no meter to gauge the level of religiosity and secularity and how to make them speak. Because yes, lots of studies starting with Saba Mahmood's study and onward, Sadaf Ahmed, hundreds of studies have been done on religiosity and secularity and NGO-led women's activism, or paid, what we call paid feminism. But that is like, now it is very common methodology, like having your informants, your interviewees, you go and sit during the activity, whether it is secular activity or a preaching session. For the past 2 years, I have prepared a questionnaire. So I do keep that with me, but then after attending every dars, then informally I talk to them, and then I fill out my own questions. Believe me, I don't want to sound like a pessimist academic person, but so many things have not only not changed, but worsened. So that is my question, because the concept of victimhood, which was created by the donor agencies in the West, when these ideas were being exported to the developing countries, WIT, WAD, GAD, everything, it was coming with donors' money. But then donors always have agenda. And the creation, the kind of victimhood, female victimhood, which was created in 1990s and then 2000, before awarding or before granting the donation, because they had to create a victim, and they were coming here as a savior. They had to save them. It was a kind of, I call it a missionary kind of secular activism. So that was then there, and it is still here. It is still a mission of the donor agencies and the Western countries and Western institutions to save women. Do Muslim women need saving? Laila Abulugad's book. It's like this argument of victimhood, and then playing a role of the savior. It's still there. It's changing its faces. It's, of course, we see, then again, the positive change, when we are gauging it, when we are seeing it, as Steve is mentioning, I personally apply class analysis. So for me, women of which class are changing, or women of which class have made progress, or women of which class are still there. my first book was published in 2006 on honor killing, Beyond Honor. And for 7 years, I was in the field, in shelters, in refuges for women, interviewing, not interviewing, meeting women who were honor killing survivors. So in Sindh, in Punjab, in KP, not in Balochistan, because there was only one ED Foundation Center over there. Nothing, and interestingly, the activists over there would say, like, I looked at the patterns of elopement, that who are the women from which class who run away, who have run away, and who take shelter in the refuges. And so the finding, a comment I remember from Balochistan, one activist said, we don't have elopement cases here because you don't have enough routes and means of transportation for women to run away. I got a comment from Ladkana, in the outskirts of Ladkana, that, I mean, fine, roads are good, we want roads, but then we have social issues also related to the roads. Guess what? So if women was trying to come out of the abusive relationship, she would walk down towards the road and take bus or go to the police station. And so I did an exercise with the activists to find out, so where does women go when she is abused? It was Mazar, Vadera's Haveli, और ग्रेव, कब्र में चली जाएगी, सुइसाइड, वेल, कुएं में जाके ढूंढे उसको, या दरिया में ढूंढे, because there was no option for her to move out of that relationship. She had no choice. So I'm talking about rural areas, the majority, and which class of rural areas, not the Vadera women, not the upper crust, but it is the majority over there. So the mobility did not, and it is still there. I'm working on the second edition of my book because it's 15 years now again, and I don't find much positive change. So it is, I don't want to sound like doing depressive research, but it is, it's like that. So I teach gender and politics and political science theories in the classrooms here in Pakistan, there in Colombia, and before that, University of Denver for 10 years, teaching development studies. And I come back, I go to the roots, because my focus and my concern is the women here. And I'm like, in which world I'm living? What am I teaching? And what are the ground realities? So that's why I organized my papers, starting with 20 years old research, then 10 years old research, Sucker, 2010. I give you a couple of comments of the parents. We were, independently, I was doing research from, we were conducting a gender awareness program from, like, I was a facilitator. We were talking about girls' education, and one father, so we were working with the community people, and one father, he got up. He said, why should I send my 3 daughters to school? My 4th one, the eldest one, I sent her to school. She did her metric, and she got a teaching job in a neighboring village. And she married to someone from our rival tribe over there. We found out later that she was married. I stopped sending my 3 girls to school. They would also become mobile, they would become independent, and they are going to bring shame on us. So I'm not sending them. This is what I'm talking about 2010.
Okay. So Tahira
So
is putting
I've
us
stopped
on a somber note. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is exactly the point of why I'm suggesting incrementing. You have to, the education for the girls has to be seen as a benefit to the household. The household has to see it as something valuable. And it's not from the donors. It has to be, working with the local communities.
Intrinsic.
What does the local community find valuable? And clearly, there also have to be some economic opportunities around it. So the villages that I worked in, I've seen profound increase access to resources and opportunities for women, but it's also closer to the capital. It's there have been more businesses opening out there. So if you're talking about rural Baluchistan, then the hill is much
Punjab.
higher,
Yeah.
or even some parts of rural Punjab. But there's different battles, but it's not the donors that have to set the agenda. It is actually the local communities, and the thing that we can do, I think, to that is of use, is to help either the Pakistan state or the donors to understand what is it that is of value in these local communities that will overcome that risk of their girls possibly doing things they don't want. If they come back with that education and the household itself benefits, then because I've heard the same in Chakwal, and I think it's also in Chakwal where you will find girls have a lot to contribute to the household that can actually only be gained from that formal education. But households have to be kind of made to understand what is it that schools give, and not just that it's about getting a teaching job, but what does the household immediately benefit
Yeah,
from?
much more intrinsically, and not just coming in from the outside in. So, Tahira, very quickly, because I know that their hands
very
up.
quickly.
Very quickly.
Like yesterday, Danish Mustafa's talk, just I draw a point from there that ask the community what do they want, what kind of development they want. Yes, that fever was there in early 2000 and up to 2010. Even today, it is like participatory development. Ask community what do why do the donors have to tell them what do they want? Okay, fine. I asked my participants in Quetta, they said, when you do a survey in the village and you say, what do you want? They said, the first thing they say is girls' school. And so, but I said that then why don't they send them to school at least for 5 years? So the list of the points, so just 1 second. The list of the points, it's like the moment she gets closer to the puberty age, or she's by the 5th grade, because they send them late. So once the puberty starts, they keep them home. A. B, if both parents work in the farms and fields, then the eldest girl has to be home to take care of the siblings. C, because as I agree with you, the facilities, I mean, the washroom facilities and all that missing. The building governments made the buildings, but there were no other facilities there. So, but ask the community, I said, oh, they want schools. They will tell you they want schools, but then they won't send them to the school.
Okay. So this is a hot topic. Even Minahil wants to make a final comment on this before I open up to the second round of questions. Minahil.
So I am thinking about the panel that I attended yesterday about classroom norms, and it almost, I understand the need to ask the community, but it is kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? Like, can you change classroom norms and those spill over to the community, or do you need to change community attitudes and then those transfer to the community? So I mean, I'm just adding to the pessimism. I'm not offering any solutions here, but I think it's an across class kind of a thing.
Okay, thank you. So we have our hand raised here, and then you, and then that lady. Yes. So after that, would you gulabi chadar mein?
Okay,
Pink, in the pink shawl.
I'm Fatima and I'm from School of Education, Lums. My question is from Minahil. So the TCF program you mentioned, and like you mentioned, they were preparing the students for university. So I really want to understand and now कि जो fields उन्होंने choose की, was they gender stereotypes थे? अगर लड़कियां choose करी थी कोई fields तो were they more like into education sector, or maybe like medicine? Did you see any change or diversion? They opted for maybe engineering, computer science, or tech. The second question is that as you mentioned, the boys benefited more than the girls. So yes, the girls also benefited, but I want to understand, was the ratio more from urban side or from rural side? So yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for a very sobering panel. This was really, I've learned a lot. But I do feel like something that's been echoed across the board is obviously the role of men in all of this. And you're working within a patriarchy. And whenever we talk about girls' education, it's almost, that's the elephant in the room, but very much something that needs to be directly addressed. And I'm wondering, to what extent can education then, in your mind, looking at the problem of gender, actually address masculinities and unsettle masculinities to move forward? So whether it's in the classroom through curriculum, or whether it's even with parents and the community at large, because that is a huge part of the problem when you think about, girls' education, the possibility or opportunities that they may have. And if I may direct to Dr. Minahil as well, given the work that she's been doing, I was just curious, and this may not be part of what you're looking at, but at least with LUMS, I teach at LUMS, so at LUMS we know that parents often do influence, the course trajectory, what subjects you study. So I'm wondering, to what extent are you including parental perception on what subjects students are choosing, not just whether they, not just their gender, and also whether they go forward for a 4-year degree or not. And also peer-to-peer sort of, to what extent do children coming from the same classroom, friends, move up, go to the same college, and then how does that sort of influence, or does it influence whether they stay in or complete a degree, or wherever they go next? Thank you.
एक वहाँ पे कोने में. Thank you. So the question about boys and masculinity can be for the whole panel, and then there's one especially for
Okay.
Minahil.
My question is directly to Dr. Tahira. You talked about participatory development, and I think that is an important, of course, it's an important aspect, but I was just wondering that how can you just go and talk to people, because their responses will be vastly different. So how can you make one decision based on a population which can't maybe decide on one response? So I think that was the question I had for Mustafa yesterday as well, but if you can answer that. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps we start with the question about boys and education and dealing with masculine and patriarchal societies. If all of you could take that question. And then there's one question for Tahira and one for Minahil. Who would like to get us started?
Can I start?
Of
At
course,
the risk of,
for
at
the
the
talk
risk of
about
looking too
masculinity.
patriarchal, I think this is spot on, and it's a question that we're wrestling with everywhere in the world, particularly around gender-based violence. I think the tide has turned in most places. It's the victim blaming has got to stop, and you recognize that it's as much about educating boys and young men not to be aggressors, not to be perpetrators of violence. I think this is critical to not only gender equality and women's equality, but it's critical for young men's happiness as well, because there was I can't remember his name, Tahir Assad, he's not Assad, Tahir Abbas, edited a book, I had a chapter in it, and he and a co-editor fell out, and the other co-editor, she just abandoned it because he was trying to make a case about honor killing which was sympathetic to the men, that men were miserable about honor killings, that they felt they had to do this, they felt the masculinity constraint they were living in gave them no choice. And his co-editor, understandably, a Pakistani woman, would have no truck with that, said no, it's just they're not nice people and let's have no sympathy for them. But I don't think we get out of these systems unless we do understand. And that's not the same as having sympathy, but understanding that very often men behave in ways that I think most people in this room would find quite abhorrent because they feel they have no choice. They feel this is the way they're supposed to behave. So helping young men, and I think this is not unique to Pakistan, this is the same in the UK, particularly in the working class, where there are these pronounced forms of what we would call toxic masculinity. But of course the backlash of that is we get the kind of working class saying, oh, you liberal elites in the city, you men have been all emasculated, you don't know what it means to be a man anymore, and then they vote for horrible right-wing people. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think you're absolutely right, that if we do not include men in this equation, then we don't change the system, and it's a systemic problem. It's not that men are bad, women are good. It's that we have systems which are actually quite damaging for everyone in them.
Okay, thank you. Tahira?
Yes. My method of research has always been, I'm trained in qualitative research, one thing. So quantitative research is like I do use data. Like when I was collecting the data on honor killings, so we were looking at statistics from the newspapers, from talking to the people. But the Quetta study has been, has like a kind of systematic analysis of the statements, the narratives of those 11 districts representatives. Yeah, so we were drawing our conclusions and findings from only those practitioners. For the sucker study, yes, it has been very, very qualitative because we would I would conduct 3 days workshop on gender sensitization, on different topics about education, female health, male health, everything, and then randomly talking to them and recording it. So recording in the sense taking notes. So I have realized the weakness of totally qualitative method in my own research also. So like I'm working on a project. Now I'm completely using the recording system. So whatever questions I ask, so I have my phone with me. So I record the answers, get the data, and then transcribe it, and then analyze, transcribe text, I send them back, and then they are getting back to me that that is not what they meant and all that. So that is another method I have taken. Again, like I told you that I'm not trained at all in quantitative research. So that is one thing. The other thing is, who is the enemy in development paradigm? Man, male, patriarchy. That has been the problem of, I mean, because coming from the liberal capitalist world, the paradigm of gender and development, I mean, they won't talk about class. I personally have to look at class analysis. For me, man is not an enemy. For me, patriarchy is, because from WID to GAD, actually, there was a big shift. And men, as if you are familiar with Nancy Fraser's work, the Marxist feminist political scientist, and she makes this point that when the GAD came, and then the class analysis collapsed in the West totally, because then the attention was diverted towards man, male, masculinity, patriarchy. They are the enemies of women, and or enemies of progress. So I don't buy this masculinity and patriarchy argument at all. For me, class analysis, it's not a perfect tool, but it does reveal many tensions in social and cultural system of everywhere, globally, whether it's the US. I mean, I have lived there for years, and I see class tensions in the US also. It is just like this here. The cleaning ladies, like our Masis here, the problem sometimes they have, the Mexican ladies, the cleaning ladies over there, they have almost similar problems. Columbia University Law School organized a panel 3 years back on undocumented immigrants and then women working in the restaurants and cleaning industry. So when they were brought on the stage, interpreters were there. They were mostly Mexican, South Americans. When they were telling the kind of harassment they go through, they were crying on the stage. And it was like I was having goosebumps. I was thinking of the exploitation of our domestic workers, female domestic workers here. So then I was saying, I mean, Marx at that time said, workers of the world unite. I think oppressed of the world unite. I mean, there are so many similarities in oppression. It's not about the color, it's not about creed, it is not about anything. It's about class. Where you are placed in your society. You're so similar. So the upper class, whether an Arab sheikh women holding bag, LV, shining diamonds, or a women in Hollywood or Bollywood, their talk is similar. Their problems are almost identical. So class has been like round. And that goes back to the political tensions between the two poles, the USSR pole and it goes back to that capitalist versus socialist system. It collapsed, but still the fear is there.
Okay,
so we don't have to talk about class, because class is very much quickly related with the socialism.
Thank you, Tahira. So we'll come to Minahil, and then I think we'll have time for one last round of questions, possibly.
Sure. Okay, so my politics is very similar, I think, in terms of anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist, and I do think class is a great way to understand. I mean, I was once, I mean, it doesn't count, but like once someone said you're a class reductionist on Twitter, and I took that to heart. But I think something that changed in me a little bit, and I'm coming to Tanya's question on masculinities, is that I also have a project with a large private school chain in Lahore that caters to mostly upper income families. And I'm just going to give you a small anecdote of how that project panned out, just to highlight a point about the inequalities that we still see across social classes. So the idea was to pair up girls and boys in grades 4 and 5 and ask them to do certain math problems together. And we were trying to measure, sociability and how they help each other. Are they competitive, or are they encouraging each other to do well? And everything we had funding, everything was panned out. It was a mixed method study. So first we were going in with an experiment, then there were supposed to be follow-ups. And the parents refused to have the girls and boys work together. And these, I'm talking about people in Lahore, upper income families, refusing, sexualizing grade 5 or 4 students to work together. So I think there is so much segregation in the society. Girls don't interact with boys. So how do you expect any norms to change when they don't even see each other as equals within the classroom, across classes? So I just wanted to give that small example that really, my co-author on this paper is from India, Vatsal, and he said, you didn't know this would happen? I said, honestly, I didn't. Like, I didn't think this would happen in grade 5 when, the project fell flat. We eventually did it. We paired girls with girls and boys with boys, but it came at a cost. So again, like really, really shocking anecdote for me. And should I just answer all the other questions that were directed at me? So Fatma, आपका जो सवाल था कि उन्होंने fields कौन सी choose की थी? So ये हमारे पास डेटा नहीं है, और मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा आपने सारे सवाल अली के सामने किए हैं, क्योंकि वो ये हमें डेटा निकाल के देंगे अब. So we are very interested. So the TCF college is pre-engineering. It doesn't have a pre-med 2-year degree curriculum, so it's not preparing students specifically for that. But again, really interesting question. We are very, very interested in doing this. Just second, आपका rural urban questions are, so these are, the college is in Karachi and it only caters to students who live in Karachi and around it. So it's 250 students a year across different batches. So हम सिर्फ 900, we're only working with 900 students that are in the college. So we haven't looked at the rural-urban dimensions. And again, Tanya's question also about parental influence in the choice of major once they enter university. Ali will include that in the database, and we will get that. And maybe
Ali is
next
getting
year,
homework.
and maybe next year when we, I'll apply again to present, and next year I'll have answers to all your questions. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe one last question. This side didn't get as many questions if there's somebody from this side. Otherwise, there's one hand raised there. Okay, so these two. So the gentleman at the back, and then ye aage jo hai. So these two questions, and then we'll wind up the session. But there are many more questions that have
Hello,
arisen.
my name is Zahir. I teach sociology and anthropology at IBA Karachi. And very interesting panel. I learned a lot. I have a question from Dr. Tahira, because you said class is very important. But what about religion? Just as Minahil said about religious socialization. I work with religious minorities. I have not worked with women, but I am going to start my fieldwork in Anthropological on Dalit women and children and how religion and class intersect. So in Pakistani society, when religion is like an overdeveloped institute and our identity is like, Pakistan ka matlab kya? So how would you, explain that? Because you mentioned class, and I agree with that, but I beg to differ a bit. Maybe when I go in the field, it might change, but I would want to know what you think about that.
ठीक है ताहिर मैं इनका भी क्वेश्चन ले लूँ हो सकता है कि कंबाइन जी
I'm coming back to you.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think my question is going back to like the incentives for girls' education. So how do you guys think about like skewed incentives to girls' education? So for example, in Indonesia, there was a huge like school building program, and the only women that were actually benefiting in terms of educational outcomes from that program were those that commanded like a high bride price, like those communities, right? In Pakistan, I think it's similar. Like a lot of women get educated just so they can get like better marriage prospects. So like these skewed incentives towards girls' education, like is that just a bitter pill we have to swallow, or is that a good thing in the end, or is that ultimately kind of like a negative, has negative externalities?
Okay, thank you. So we'll start with Tahira.
Okay.
You can take that specific question and also this question which was addressed to all the panel.
Why
and
did
then
I
we'll
say,
come to the panelists.
mere dil ki baat kar di, because right now I'm teaching a course at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Aga Khan University, Gender, Islam and Politics. So I'm using class tool to teach my religion course, my history course. That is the only safest tool which I have to teach gender, Islam and politics. Steve is the culprit who coined this title, and I was like, what are you doing with me? Teaching this course to first-year undergrad students, and then how do I do where I was teaching at Columbia, PhD master's students, the same course. He said, you just came freshman, you have all the knowledge, and you teach these kids. So I said, I started slashing my readings, and in the beginning, we had an open discussion with the students, the faculty. Steve coined it as Grill the Faculty session. We were there. About 86 students were there, and they were asking questions about me. And 2-3 things. They said 3 times student got up and said, ma'am, it's a very sensitive course. Are you not scared of it, teaching in Pakistan? Again, it's a sensitive course. Again, I said, wait. What do you mean by sensitive? In what sense? I mean, no, idhar to blasphemy ho jati hai, idhar to ye ho jata hai, idhar to wo. Maine kaha, see one thing. I am a history teacher, political science teacher. I'm not a religious studies teacher. One thing. The other thing is, you will see what kind of approach, methodology or tool I use to teach religion in Pakistan, and especially Islam. So class is my safest tool. So I teach religion through class analysis, economy through class analysis, everything. So it is very close to my heart, though the whole world has rejected class. But no, I'm bringing class back. in my classrooms.
Okay. Steve? Some
Thank
final
you.
comments and a response to this question as well.
So, quick response. I think absolutely it's a bitter pill we have to swallow, not just here, but everywhere around the world. This is the pill we've had to swallow. You can use a carrot or a stick. You can penalize people for not putting their girls in school. I don't think Pakistan has the infrastructure to do that. So there has to be a reward system put in place, and I would think that's just, that's a desirable thing. I don't see a downside to that really personally. Final comment, I think I am much more optimistic than everyone else seems to be. I've seen so much progress in 42 years here, particularly among rural women. I have actually seen rural women's position better than it was 40 years ago. Not great, not where it should be, but compared to what I saw when I first went to rural Punjab, it's like night and day difference. And I know that's one part of Punjab, it's not all parts of Punjab, it's not all parts of KP or Balochistan. I know there's many areas where it has not, we've not seen that development, but I have personally seen the material conditions of women improve. And I have to conclude that there's more discussion of this sort of thing now. You say it's sensitive, it's controversial. Your students love it. Your students come to me and tell me that we're able to talk about really controversial things. They talk about biological parts of being gendered biology, and you think, when I was a high school kid in Lahore, would we ever have talked about menstruation or menarche? Not in a million years. Now, young Pakistani women are saying, this is part of my experience, I have the right to talk about it, and I don't care who's in the room. That to me is progress. Not done, but it's progress.
Thank you. Do you want to make a final comment before I close the session?
Sure. Although I think we should end on that positive note, I have nothing positive to say. I think the only thing that I'll say, if you're a sociologist, you'll call it improvement in material conditions, or if you're an economist, you'd say returns to higher education, like in terms of income. I think that there is significant research that talks about if people see changes in their material well-being or around them, or higher income, higher returns to higher education, they follow, like other people do follow. So I do think that we are in a decent place. I think it's also how do you communicate that to others, that lives change through higher education.
Thank you very much. Thank you all the panelists. And I myself, having been in the field of education, I would also like to end on a positive note, because I do think that while there are these repressive elements still in our society, there are also shifts taking place in our society, in our culture, that are enabling girls and women to become more participatory in the society and avail themselves of the opportunities that are available to them. And I'm not just saying that from trying to sound positive, but I'll give you one anecdote from my research. I've done lots of research in schools, essentially in Sindh, in Karachi and in rural Sindh. And once when we went to a rural school, it was a secondary school, and it was a gender segregated school, so it was a boys' school. And when I looked at the names of the students, there were 2 girls' names were written there in the list. And I asked the teacher, I said, "Ke ye kaun hai?" And he said, there is no secondary school near enough for these girls to go, and the parents have had a consultation with the head teacher, and the head teacher has agreed that the girls can come and attend the classes, although they will not take part in the co-curricular activities, in the games and in the assembly, but they'll only attend the classes. To me, that showed a significant shift in how parents were valuing education, to the extent that they were willing to brave the societal norms and send those 2 girls to the boys' school. So on that positive note, I would like to thank the audience for your candid expression of the issues and for your very good questions. Thank you.